to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Delise Torres. Delise, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Jen, for having me.
I
So
am
excited.
I'm so excited you're here too. And I would love for you to start with, how did you get into writing?
Well, I actually never thought of becoming a writer. I hear a lot of writers say, "Oh, I've been writing since I was a little kid," but that was not me. I mean, I come from Puerto Rico. My family wanted me to study, be a doctor or something like that. I ended up studying microbiology in college, and it wasn't until I moved to Germany when I was in my late 30s that I actually, well, I couldn't find a job in my field. And so it was the culture shock, the language, plus not finding a job. And so it was a lot. So I started journaling and just thinking about my life. And then I wanted to write like a memoir for me. And then I found tips for writing fiction. And I had these daydreams that I had always since I was a teenager. And I just saw these like movies, but it was never me. It was like me imagining something, another life, but it wasn't me in the dreams, in these images. They were always in English because they're sort of I was a huge watching US shows and movies. And I never thought, and I once told my husband once, I have these things. Like that was when we were in Germany, like I had never told anyone. And he's like, "Oh, have you thought of writing it?" And I thought, no, it's so hard. So then when I was looking to write a memoir, I said, okay, let me just write this for fun. And then it was like this whole new world started, opened for me. And I just realized, like, oh my God, these were kind of stories and characters that I've had all this time. And they were meant to be written. Like, I should. And then I was writing it, and it was so fun just to read through it again. And it just came so easy that then I was hooked.
I love that. I love that because, when you just described, watching almost kind of like you were watching a movie play out, and like you said, it wasn't you as the character, you were watching, this scene or these characters
Mhm.
do stuff. It's almost kind of like the characters were showing up saying, hey, are you going to come with us? Are you following us? Because we
Mhm.
have something we want to tell you.
Yeah, and I would revisit sometimes the same stories and change them in my head, like revise.
Yeah.
And they would change, and sometimes they just pop up. I'm watching a movie or listening to a song, or it's a dream. And then I would just keep it would stay in my head for a while, but I never thought I was like, yeah, I never thought I'm creative. Like I had a Spanish class, we were had a project to write a novel for the end of time, and it was so hard to write this novel. And I hated it. But I usually I liked writing or like essays, that sort of stuff. And the teachers always told me that I was good at it. So I had at least the talent for writing. And I mean, I did a master's PhD, and the professors were like, "Oh, you did really good at writing, like the dissertation, these things." But I always thought of fiction is so hard. I mean, it was hard to learn all the craft and these things, but it was so fun. And I love it. Like I can't believe like it took all that kind of like I think I was forced. Like if I hadn't moved to Germany and hadn't lived through that experience, I probably would have never found it. Like I needed to be forced into not having a job because I was always studying or working to finally sort of find that in myself. So I think like it was meant to be.
It sounds like a little bit of, you know, heavenly redirection in a sense.
Yes,
Like
yes.
let me get you to where you're going, and where I would really like you to be. Sometimes it seems like we make plans and then God goes, yeah, no, we're going to do something else.
Yes, yes,
But I like
exactly.
your idea. So, but what I hear you saying is that there was always that love of writing, but the technical writing that the dissertation required, the nonfiction
Mhm,
technical type
mhm.
writing, it sounds like that almost was a little easier at first than the fiction writing, and they're requiring different, it's really kind of different styles, even though yes, it's writing, but they're requiring two different almost types of skill sets. So how did you make that transition in your writing from a technical type style to a creative style?
Well, I think a lot of it is like these images. So I get the dialogue. So of course, when you watch a movie, it's all dialogue. So I just wrote the dialogue that I heard. And so that helped to be the showing part of it. So it was a lot of that. And I read an article about show versus tell that helped a lot, and saying like, oh, you have to come up with a scene if you want to explain something. And I thought, oh God. And and I was a bit inhibited there. Like, I've never studied creative writing or written anything like that. But I read a lot of women's fiction or literary fiction. And so I had it, I guess, absorbed in me. And then I read Stephen King's book on writing. So I was always a fan of his. And I thought, oh, well, like I like him, and it's a memoir, so I'll read it. And then he just says, all you need to do is read a lot and write a lot. You don't need a degree. And I thought, come, just do it for fun. And I did it, and it was really fun. And just keeping in mind that you have to show and create a scene. And since I mostly had the dialogue, that's what comes to me first, the dialogue. So in that sense, I was easy for me. And then I bought this book, Emotional Thesaurus,
Yes, yes.
which helps to show the feelings so that you're not just telling them. So that also helped a lot, because then I was like, okay, I need to show. So I'm glad that I just found that article that had all this. So I was already, when just from the start, I knew that that exists, this show versus tell thing. So I was already writing it with that in mind, and finding ways of how to show the emotions in that sense. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. The challenge was more the structure, but in terms of the overall, I think it's easy. That took me a while to learn the structure and introducing the characters, backstory, how much, how little, that sort of thing.
So let's go into that a little bit more. How did you go through and learn structure and pacing? Like, what were some things that you did so that it sounds to me like you probably researched some, you probably read some books about more on the craft and seeing what to do with that. But what else did you do to, as you were working on your piece, to say, okay, I've got a first draft. How did you check yourself to say, how is this structure going? How do I like this pacing? What were kind of some of the things that you did to help yourself keep moving forward?
Well, I wrote the first draft, and then and I thought I'm done, And but no, then I like to research a lot, so I always look online stuff, and I came up with this website helping writers become authors. And she has a whole series about structure, and the three act structure, and even character structure and scene structure. And so I was like, oh my God, I need to fix my book. Because then she mentions all about the character arc and the first scene or the characteristic moments. So she has all these, is like an outline. So it's easy to follow how she explains it. So I then did a whole outline, because the first draft, I was just like pantser. No, I just wrote it. And then I started then the outlining, and I rewrote the book. And then I got feedback on it also, because yeah, that's for me very important. And that first book is not the book that is my debut. The first book, never, I couldn't get an agent with that. And I revised it, but it's still there. I kind of figured out last year how to fix it, because it was still kind of not working. But so for the next book, which is the book I have now, that one I was like, okay, I need to start from the beginning being outlining and not just pantser. So I followed the steps like she meant. She has all the outline series and everything. So I followed that, and that helped me a lot with what scenes to include, like what's important. So that helped me a lot to have a structure. And then I needed more of, I think, the character. I think for me, the most difficult part is the first part, like the introduction to the part. I'm really like, I get the idea and it's like completely like I have all the major points and it's all dialogue, so I can write that. But then when I get feedback and it's like, okay, I don't understand this character, why is she like this? And I'm like, well, she explains it later. Then no, you should put that because I need to follow her. And so then I discovered a story genius. And with that, then she talks about the backstory is the story, and you need to add the layers to go deeper. And so then I started working through that, and then I added more flashbacks to the story to kind of create the character so that the people can understand it. And I mean, I worked on that. It was the most challenging was getting the character from the beginning, this introduction part. But yeah, I started that first novel that I wrote was in 2014, 15 is when I wrote it. And this book that's coming out I started in 2018, the outlining process as a process. And I was still rewriting it last year when I sold it finally. So it's been a lot of rewriting and learning, and also like integrating the plot, the subplots. Like I thought, oh, you have all the subplots and yay. And then no, they need to be kind of connected to the main story. So that was also something because I have in my book that's coming now, it's a romance, but there's also like a work subplot. There's a food inspection. It's set in a cookie manufacturing plant, and there's a food inspection coming. And I just had that, it was sort of separate to the main character. So I had to really how do I integrate that to her character arc? That was a lot of work. That was the most challenging thing, was to connect the subplot to the main arc. But that was something that I learned then later that, oh, I'm supposed to do this. Okay, I didn't know. So it's been a work in progress, just with feedback and just learning, just researching, yeah, reading articles, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing a few different things. So first off, what I'm hearing are divine breadcrumbs. So you took some
Yeah.
steps, and the next step presented itself. So hey, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Well, look at this. Maybe this might give you some inspiration or some guidance or some direction. So you were also staying present with that space, which is really cool. Another thing I'm hearing was like to your point about you have the story written, the first draft, and oh, I got to go back through it again. And when you're going back through it, the fact that you were plotting and really going back through the structure, saying, I need to see these parts, does it align? And if not, what do I do with that? That's a great technique if pantsing was the first way through, and that is coming back and saying, what does this feel like? Does this do what I need it to do? That's a great way to do it, is to go back and almost outline what you've now written. Does it work? But another thing that I'm hearing is that first manuscript was a really great place for you to hone skills, for you to it's an endurance, first off, of writing a book. That's endurance. That's determination and grit, showing up and getting those pieces little bit by little bit put together, getting that first pass done, wait, doing it again, wait, fixing it again. Do the pieces, are they integrating where they need to? Sometimes, to your point, you do have to put it aside. And then you might get that idea, I know how to fix that now. So whenever you choose to, you can bring that back through. And if you do, great. And if you don't, that's okay. But it served its purpose to help you get to one tough cookie.
Yeah, it did.
But so question for you to your point about this current book and taking the subplot of work with blending it back into your character. would you talk a bit about that? And in particular, I know that your background lends itself very specifically to the nature of this. So I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about how you brought in something that you're passionate about and bringing it through to help your character have the well-roundedness and get your readers to buy into her too.
So the idea for One Top Cookie, it came from a dream. I had a dream, and it was just a scene with the two characters talking, and I knew they're in a relationship, or they were in a relationship, and they were talking. In the dream, they were talking outside the company where I used to work at. I used to be a quality assurance manager in a dried cherry manufacturing plant. And in that company, the production was mostly women. The women were the ones who they inspected the cherries. So once they're dried, they were inspecting them for pits and the leaves and these things, and they were packaging it. And so the men, they were either drying or they were the mechanics. So I thought, well, based on that, the girl character would be in production and the guy would be a mechanic. So that was kind of for me set. And then since for confidentiality and stuff, then I didn't set it at the cherry plant and I made up cookies. So I thought, oh, I moved it to Florida. There's a lot of Puerto Rican people there. So I thought that would be a good setting. And I decided to just make up my own company. So it's a cookie manufacturing plant. I thought that would be cute for women's
It is.
fiction. And yeah, and then so my character, she's a production supervisor and she's not well educated. So when I had the idea, I was always that she was in production and she wouldn't be well educated. And then the company is going through this food inspection, quality inspection. So at the beginning, because she's not the quality assurance manager, who's the person in charge of it, and she's in a production like a floor supervisor, but she's not in charge. There's a higher production. So in the first draft, it was the two of them fighting over in the food processing. There's a lot of conflict between the quality manager and the production. The production wants yield, 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 make more, and the quality has to be, no, you need to follow the rules and there has to be some safety, quality. So there's usually conflict. So the conflict was mostly them, and she was just sort of kind of witness, or she would try to help them. Oh, you should work, but it wasn't really her fight in the story. And the owner of the company, so she's not the owner, and that was also challenged. Like the story would work much better if the owner was the protagonist, because it's the stakes are hers, it's her company, and she needs to pass this inspection while my character is just an employee in the company. And so that's when I found out that this didn't work, was because I got a critique from someone, and she just critiqued the summary and the query. And I wanted it to be women's fiction. So there's the romance, and the romance genre usually focuses on the romance, and women's fiction has something else, and the romance is sort of secondary. So I knew based on this, because I wanted to add this subplot, because yeah, I studied food science and I worked in quality assurance, and I thought, and since I couldn't find a job in Germany, then I thought, oh, how cool. I can then add, because I have a PhD, so I studied 10 years and then not to do anything with it was for me very sad. Like, oh my God, I studied 10 years now. And so I thought, oh, this could be now everything I learned and the work experience I have, I can bring it into this book. So it's something I know. And I thought it would be different because most books are either in a cafe or a bakery or restaurant. And I thought there's nothing like set at a cookie company. So for me, it was important to have this subplot in the book. And because the character just came to me through the dream. So she was like this. So I wanted to be true to the character. So I knew, okay, no, she's not educated. She's a production. She's not the owner. And so, yeah, so I knew it wouldn't work as a romance because I wanted to have this subplot and it was a big part of the book. And then I was in the query and because of the space, I didn't have so much about the company and in the summary either. And the person critiquing was like, well, if you add more of that, then it would make it women's fiction, like clearly. And I was like, well, but it's just that Karina is not part of it. And that's when I click, like, yeah, okay, I need to make her part of the story of that whole conflict. So I had to change it so that it is a part of her arc. So her arc is that she doesn't believe in love. She wants to stay alone and doesn't want to change. So she's, let's say, against change. And the company is expanding, so she doesn't want the change of the company. And then I also added that the owner, who's a woman, is having a relationship with the quality assurance manager. And Karina is like afraid that the owner, Lacey, will be sort of lost in the relationship and will lose the drive for the company. Like the Lacey is always has been single and is driven for the business, and Karina's mom had a relationship like that where she sort of lost her way into a relationship, became a housewife. So Karina's afraid that the Lacey would follow in the mom's footsteps. But to get to this, it took many versions of the story to get here to like, oh, and it was because of my agent. She suggested something, and then I was like, oh, yeah, because she's like, why is she against the inspection or sort of? And then I was like, oh, because, yeah, Lacey, originally she was not against this relationship. So, of course, she would be against it because then it's like her mom. So it took a lot of time. Like I think I find the story in when I revise. So it took a lot of time to get to that. But yeah, I try to add more stakes to her. Oh, the company can be lost. She can lose her job, which is important to her. And so
Yeah,
then having her drive that conflict with the food inspection sort of then
I
was
love that. I love that because I can hear how the layering was starting to happen but you still needed to have something to work with. You had to have your first pass at least to go, this is where I think this needs to go. And I really want it to I want it to have more of this, like the depth element of other challenges. And I want it to have romance, but I don't want it to be only romance. And I love how you found a way to weave something else in to create that change. And that changed it in a different for a genre. One thing, you moved it from one genre to another, really, but it has elements of both because of that. Yeah. And I love that. So I am curious, what would you suggest to someone who might be listening and working on their own manuscript and maybe a little frustrated that it's not going the way they want, or maybe they feel a little stuck? And even if they have the idea of how they might fix it, to get back in and start it, get it fixed, because that's a lot of work to get that manuscript written, to go back through and revise, and something else is needed. But sometimes getting back in might feel a little daunting, going, oh my gosh, I've got to do this again. What would you say to them?
So the main thing is feedback, because I got a lot of feedback. Like that first draft, I got feedback, and the second draft I had it the same, so it was still the same. And it wasn't until I got this feedback that I was like, oh yeah, okay, Karina needs to be invested. And I had to like, oh my God, do I take it out completely, and I make it pure romance, or do I try to fix it in some way? And so that was really hard to decide, because I'm like, no, I want to have this subplot in the story. And so yeah, I think feedback and getting feedback from different people. In this case, it was an editor who I belong to the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and they have a mentoring program, so I was matched with her. She was not so expert in romance, and so she had like a different view. She could see it a different way, I guess. And I told her I wanted to be women's fiction, not romance, or not pure romance. And so feedback, because yeah, like I said, the feedback from my agent was the one that finally clicked everything, and that was 2.5 years after I wrote the book. And just she just had a different mind. She just saw it a different way, or she's like, why is Karina? And I'm like, I never, like, it was not my intention. And then it was like after I was working through her revisions, I kind of clicked like what she meant. And then I'm like, but oh my God, it took so long. And also the being open to changing the story, because I've had experience critiquing other people's work that they're kind of get stressed or don't want to change the story, how they have it or how they envisioned it. And sometimes you do have to change it. So like I had to rewrite this subplot for the food, like, I don't know, 5 times, I don't know, and adding new scenes and taking out scenes, and it was awful. But and like I didn't want to change it. So like when I got my offer from my publisher, they wanted to make it more of a bakery. And I'm like, no, because it's a food manufacturing plant. I want to be true to my profession, not a bakery, and it wouldn't work because it would be less people. The complete situation wouldn't work. And I said, but I'm willing to change some things. And they asked me, okay, give me an outline of what you would change. And so I took out some scenes that were very technical, like food safety terms. I added more flashbacks because for it to be the product, you have to do research and development. So you test the cookies like at home, or so I added more of that, more flashbacks. And my agent came up with these great ideas also. And so just like at the beginning when they told me that, I was like, no way, no. Then as I thought about it, I was like, maybe I could cut some scenes and add some flashbacks. And then when they came with the give me an outline, and my agent gave some ideas, I then was like, everything clicked and I could come up with a lot of changes. And in the end, I'm really happy with how it came out because it flows much better. It's simpler,
Good. Yeah.
less complicated, because I had a lot of technical things in there because I wanted to add, of course, all the stuff from being a quality assurance manager. But then, okay, I don't need all that. I added more about what is a food scientist or what's the difference between a bakery and so for people who don't know. So I think those two things, and just willing to do it. It's hard when once you wrote it to rewrite it again. I have everything very well connected, and so I have to completely break it down and put it again. And it's just so hard to do, and especially when you've worked with a book for 3 years. But when I got the idea, then it was like fun, let's say, or yeah. And then once you have it ready and you see it, then it's, it's great. So just be willing to put in the work and to be flexible and open-minded.
Delise, this has been awesome. Where can people connect with you and where can they get your book, One Tough Cookie?
So you can find my book everywhere books are sold. It's in paperback, audiobook, and ebook. And you can find me at delisetorres.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter at Torres Delise.
I love that. Thank you so much for being on the show. This has been such a fun conversation.
Thank you. It was really fun. Thank you.